So I'm going to introduce the moderator, Dr. Shanna Brown. Dr. Shanna Brown is an associate professor of history and also the director of the honors program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa campus. She got her bachelor's degree summa cum laude from Amherst College and her doctorate in history from the University of California, Berkeley. Professor Brown is a historian of science and culture in Asia, particularly modern China. Her research and teaching bring the sciences and humanities in conversation, foregrounding the contributions of Asian intellectuals, especially women, to modern science and academic life. Her goal is to build awareness and appreciation for the ethnic and gender diversity that underlays the many positive transformations of our modern world. Let's welcome Dr. Shanna Brown. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Chung, for the really kind introduction, and I'm delighted to wish you all aloha mai kakou. I'm Shanna Brown from the University of Hawaii. On behalf of myself, the panelists, and the organizers, I would first like to express my heartfelt aloha and thanks to our hosts, San Diego State University and the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, together with the following museums and foundations: the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, the Chinese American Museum in DC, the Chinese American Museum of Los Angeles, the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum, the Museum of Chinese in America, the Wing Luke Museum, the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Hawaii Foundation, and the Hawaii Chinese History Center. And I'm personally just so thrilled to be included in this important panel, which introduces so much rich material in the history of the Chinese in Hawaii. Before we begin, just a brief note that we will welcome questions after all the panelists have spoken. So please take note of your questions and save them for a discussion period at the end. It is now my pleasure to present a brief slideshow with a few contextual remarks on the major eras of the history of the Chinese in Hawaii. As we know, Hawaii has been a crucial node of the Chinese diaspora. Indeed, there were Chinese here trading sandalwood only a few years after the arrival of Europeans. By the mid-19th century, Chinese came to Hawaii often involuntarily as contract labor. After enduring their contracts, some returned to China, but some stayed and became farmers or ranchers or went into trade or the professions in cities like Lahaina and Honolulu. Next slide, please. By the era of King David Kalakaua, the Chinese represented almost a quarter of the Kingdom of Hawaii's population and were prosperous in trade. They communicated in Hakka or Cantonese, Hawaiian, and English, attended Chinese schools and churches, and even paid their water bills in Chinese. Next slide, please. During the late 19th century through the period of US annexation, the Chinese community created benevolent societies, retirement homes, cemeteries, schools, and churches. There were Chinese language newspapers, radio stations, and movie theaters. Banker William Kaifang Yap petitioned the Hawaii legislature to create the University of Hawaii, which is the institution that I'm proud and grateful to call my home. Chinese purchased bonds from Sun Yat-sen to fund his activities. Gladys Lee, or Li Ling-ai, produced the film Kukan about China's resistance to Japanese invasion, which won an Academy Award. A chemistry major at the University of Hawaii, Wao Kao-kong enlisted in the Air Force after Pearl Harbor and became the first Chinese-American fighter pilot. Next slide, please. The statehood period was a time of many firsts, and that's Wao Kao-kong on the right there, including the first Chinese-American senator, Hiram Fong, who was also the first Asian-American to run for US president. Overall, the Chinese declined as a percentage of the population, but remains a crucial community with strong historical, social, and cultural roots in Hawaii. Thank you very much. And it is now my honor to introduce our first panelist, Professor Douglas Chong. Professor Douglas D.L. Chong, a Hawaiian Chinese, is a community leader, educator, author, and premier historian of the Chinese in Hawaii. Douglas has helped operate the Hawaii Chinese History Center for 54 years and was recently named the 2024 Living Treasure of Hawaii. Welcome, Douglas.
Good morning. On behalf of the Hawaii Chinese History Center, I'd like to discuss a very rare chapter of Dr. Sun's revolutions, which has seldom been acknowledged in history, namely the impact of the grassroots or Hing fellow villager movement. It was the humble masses of laboring Hing San immigrants in Hawaii whom Sun personally involved in changing the course of China's history. Historically, Hawaii has been one of the largest Hing San diaspora or Zhongshan communities in the world. Sun grew up here and studied with his fellow Pundi and also Hakas who shared their Hingli sentiments and pure loyalty with Sun. As one of their own, they generously provided financial commitment and hands-on support through their revolutionary groups, debate societies, and Hongmun Triad lodges. Gyeongsang County, renamed Zhongshan in 1925, was divided into 5 diverse linguistic groups, namely the Gyeongsang dialect, an offshoot of the Yutwa language, which was Dr. Sun's native language and which I will be speaking today. Then the Namlong, the Lungtu, and the Samhyong dialects, tracing back 1,000 years to Fukien. Then lastly, the Hakka dialect, spoken by natives in the Ngwaisan Mountains of Gyeongsang. Dr. Sun's Punti roots trace back to Namlong in the Ming Dynasty until 1774 when his ancestor Tin Chiu Kung migrated to Choihang village where Sun was born. Since the 1840s, the strife between the Punti and the Hakka was intensified due to the constant warfare and the Taiping Rebellion. Consequently, this dissension was so immense that it carried on in Hawaii for 3 generations with very few intermarriages ever occurring. Yet it was Dr. Sun and his guiding principles and charismatic personality which unified the Hakka and the Punti. Sun came to Hawaii at 12 years old, and without the influence of his Hakka buddies like Ho Fan here, he would not have been exposed to Western thought and Christian ideals. Most Hakka people came as sugar laborers through the Christian Basil missions in Guangdong, and as Christians, they progressively sent their sons to Western schools. Ho became the editor for Sun's revolutionary ideas in the Hingzhonghui political newspapers Tan San San Bao, Long Gi Bao, Ban Sang Bao, and Wa Heng Bao. On November 24th, 1894, Sun, Ho Fan, and Li Cheung, another Hakka, met at Ho's home on Emma Street and founded the Hingzhonghui, the Xingzhonghui, or Revived China League, to lay plans for the Chinese Revolution. While Sun himself was not Hakka, many of his classmates and peers were, like Chang Kim here, an early Hakka Christian and Hingzhonghui member who returned to fight in the First Revolution. Earlier, Chang had been a classmate of Dr. Sun, who frequently bunked in with the Changs when his brother, Sun Mi, frowned on Sun's new enthusiasm for Christianity. Chang's mother here, Chang Wuxi, washed Dr. Sun's laundry and cooked for him during those lean years. She survived Dr. Sun, dying in 1940 at 107 years old, and was duly recognized for nurturing a hero who changed the direction of China's future. Her younger son here, Chang Chao, Sun's Hawaii bodyguard, also returned to China in Sun's 1907 revolution and later served in Shanghai as a bank commissioner for Sun. Another Hakka, Song Kian, ran a restaurant where Sun had his meals as a student. Song dedicated his fortune to Sun's early revolution and enlisted both his part Hawaiian sons to fight in the later revolutions for Sun. Their mother, Mary, was sister to Robert Wilcox, the Hawaiian revolutionist. Dang Yam Nam, a Siap merchant in Kahului, liquidated his assets to purchase arms for the revolutionaries and returned with Dr. Sun and Song in 1895 to fight in the Canton Uprising. Chung Mok Hin, a wealthy Hakka merchant called the King of Lahaina, owned lands and stores in Ka'anapali, Olowalu, Kula, Paia, and Makawao. Chung, his good friend Sun Mi, Dr. Sun's brother, and Sun's uncle, Yeong Man Na, influenced Sun to join the Hongmun Triad Society on January 11, 1904 in Honolulu at the Ket On Society. This made Sun a sworn Triad brother for protection and aid by Hongmun members throughout the world. It was the San Francisco Hongmun members who sprung him from the immigration station in 1904 when the Pawong Dong loyalists ratted that Sun's Hawaiian birth certificate was really a fake. Powerful triad members obtained an appeal for him and saved Dr. Sun after 10 days so he could continue his second fundraising campaign in the United States. Throughout Hawaii, Southeast Asia, and the United States, Hong Mun brothers continued to facilitate and fund his travels and protect their imperiled leader. A famous Bundi patriot and fellow Choi Hang villager was Luk Chan, a revolutionist who rescued Sun's family in 1896 by bringing them to Maui to escape the Manchu forces. Luk's father, Luk Lan Kuk, and his cousin Luk Hau Tong and Dr. Sun fought in the first Canton uprising of 1895. During that first revolution, Hau Tong was caught and executed and became the first martyr of the revolution. Dr. Sun himself narrowly escaped while Lan Kuk was captured and confined to life imprisonment. Later, Lan Kuk had served, or earlier rather, Lan Kuk had served as a teacher to Dr. Sun and Sunmi's children in Kula, Maui. This was the Sun clan in the early Maui years where Sun's children were brought up and where one daughter was born. Many of Sun's Choi Hang villagers also settled in Waiakoa, Kamaole, and Keokea, Kula to maintain and protect the Sun clan. Earlier, we discussed how Dr. Sun became a Hong Mun member in 1904. This was a powerful advantage since there were over 36 Hong Mun lodges throughout Kauai, Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii. The first one, the Chungifoikon, began in Ko'olauloa, Oahu in 1869. The next began in 1874 in Na'alehu. The third one began in Kohala in 1885, and 30 more sprung up throughout Hawaii. The last Hong Mun society, Hing Society, was erected by Zhong Guan Yu in 1912 in Lahaina. Most lodges were populated by Hakka laborers who enthusiastically received Dr. Sun to hear his inspiring revolutionary plans and to contribute nickels, dimes, and quarters for the cause. Remember, they earned only $5 a month, of which $3 was taken out for food and lodging. This reconstructed Waipahu Zongyi Triad Society was the hub of hundreds of Chinese laborers in the sugar and rice industry, which formed the second largest Chinese community in the islands. Hapsang Kongsi was a Punti Hong Mun society located in Wanalua Valley where the Chinese settled after the 1900 Chinatown fire. Hapsang Kongsi, together with Bao Leongse, Wo On, Yi Hang, and Ji Kung Tong, formed the few existing Punti triads. Simultaneously, the Kopmeng Tong, Kuomintang, or Revolutionary Society, was founded in 1903, followed by the Tongmeng Ui Alliance Society in 1910. During the tumultuous period when the Pawang Tong Manchu loyalists battled with Sun's revolutionary followers, the Sun family remained in Maui as Sun sought asylum in Japan, Europe, and America, raising funds and support. This was the very last picture taken of the Sun family before 1907, when Sunmi took his mother, Madame Young, back to China before moving on to Penang. Besides the few Punti Hong Mun clubs, many Punti people assisted by Sun's campaign managers founded the modern debate or oratorical societies. Here in Waipahu, my grandfather, Ngin Sak, met with Dr. Sun twice to create the Waipahu Insitse, or the Waipahu Debate Society, which met in the rice fields of Waipio. Sun's campaign managers here were Yong Fong Tat, president of the Tongmeng Ui, as well as Ng Tit Sang and Ng Ang Sang, and Sun's chauffeur, He Dai Tong. All except he later returned to China to help build a new China with Sun. Dr. Sun issued these revolutionary bonds through these Punti organizations, the Kuomintang, the Tongmeng Ui, Hong Mun, and debate societies, which sprang up in Chinatown, Punalu'u, Wahiawa, Kahului, Wailuku, Paia, Hilo, Kapa'a, Hanapepe, and Hanale. In 1910, the Punti laborers and merchants all joined Sun's Tongmeng Ui Alliance Society to help support Sun's revolutionary momentum in China. On October 10th, 1911, with the victory of the Sunhoi, or Xinghai Revolution, and the creation of a new republic, revolutionary organizations, debate societies, and Hong Mun clubs alike all celebrated the dawning of a new China, which Dr. Sun with his ability to reach out and motivate the common man, had involved them all in creating. The new republic now saw the Hawaii Kuomintang organization grow to enormous numbers, even attracting many of the loyalists of the Pawangtang, which had now disbanded. On March 12, 1925, Dr. Sun Yat-sen passed away. In Honolulu, Chinatown, all the Chinese here, Punti, Hakka, Siap Samyap, and their organizations all joined to mourn their hero, a great revolutionary who dedicated his whole life to the Chinese people. He alone had unified all groups of Chinese to help realize his dream to build a new nation and to change the destiny of China. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Douglas, for the wonderful presentation on Dr. Sun Yat-sen and the impact of the grassroots supporters of his revolution. We are now very glad to be able to enjoy a contribution from Leland Sun. Leland K.H. Sun is the eldest son of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who was the eldest son of Sun Fo, the only son of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Leland Sun was born on June 7th, 1943 in New York City and was raised and educated in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Honolulu, and Southern California. Majoring in biochemistry at Whittier College, he later went on to work for 37 years in the motion picture and television industry. From the late 1960s to the early 1970s, Leland gained valuable real estate development experience while working for his grandfather Sun Fo's company, Sun and Sun Inc. In 1997, Leland retired from the motion picture and television industry to assist his father, Sun Yat-sen, in managing Canara USA Inc., a real estate investment and consulting company. Notably, Leland Sun is a founding member of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California and is an active trustee on the Songqing Foundation in China. Regrettably, Leland could not give a presentation live today as he has a prior commitment.
Excuse me, he is here with us. Yes.
I'm delighted, and I'm delighted to see that. So it's great to see you, Leland. But I think we're going to go forward with a video, which Dr. Lily Chung and board member Dr. Robert Stein of the San Diego Chinese Historical Society Museum were able to pre-record with Leland. So here are some fascinating excerpts of this interview, which in the future will be made into a longer and separate webinar in its full length. Thank you.
Speaking of Hawaii, which you've mentioned, because you split your time between California and Hawaii, and are you aware that, I guess you probably are, that that Sun Yat-sen actually started the Kuomintang in the 1890s before it got exported to China in Honolulu? Isn't that amazing?
Right. Well, he started a forerunner of the KMT, which had a different name. And then he went up to San Francisco, worked out of a newspaper office to help spread the word of this new organization. Yes.
Yeah. You know, I find it surprising that he is the founder of the KMT, which is sort of a right of center political party, still very active in Taiwan, and he's equally revered by the mainland Chinese communists as well as the KMT. That's amazing. What do you think about that, Leland?
Well, the reason why mainland China respects him is because he overthrew the Qing dynasty, Empress Dowager and Emperor Puyi. And if he didn't do that, no chance for communism, because we would have the emperor or empress. Now, in forming the Republic of China, which took him many years to decide to form a republic, because he went to Europe, I want to say 5 to 8 different times, and spent years studying the political systems of European countries and even Asian countries. And he decided upon a republic similar to the U.S., but with 5 branches. And so what he formed, in my opinion, is, how do you say, a combination of the different governments in the West to also address the government situations in Asian countries. So that's why the 5 political systems or forms of government, parties of government, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he also, even though, again, he founded this rather conservative KMT, his original 3 principles were remarkably, I would say, liberal, wouldn't you say? Talking about welfare for the people and nationalism and democracy. So what do you think about that?
In researching the foreign political systems in European and Asian countries, I felt that he felt it was the best way to promulgate the Samanchu'i, the 3 principles.
Yeah. So, are you in your life ever called on to give talks about your great-grandfather, just like we're doing this very minute? Or is this an unusual event for you?
Unusual event in the sense that when I go to China, I've been to China, mainland China, how do you say? Safe to say over 20 different times. And the last time, well, every time I go, I get interviewed by local newspapers in English. But then what they publish in Chinese, I don't know, because I don't read or nor write Chinese. And so I meet the presiding president of mainland China. We shake hands, even, how do you say, sit in a sitting room together and make a small talk. And in the last meeting with Xi Jinping, I was the #1 guest that he shook hands with in a room of 33 other individuals. So but they don't ask me to give speeches or anything else. Excuse me. So in Taiwan, the same. They don't ask me either.
Wow, wow.
That is actually an interesting story, which probably we wouldn't be getting from anybody else except you, Leland. This is cool. This is exactly why we wanted to talk with you today. This is very, very cool. Let me ask you a question, Leland, that you may know the answer to. What's your guess as to why Dr. Sun resigned so so abruptly from the presidency of the brand new Republic of China, started January 1st, 1912. Although he was still the president of the KMT until he died in 1925, but nevertheless, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, how do you say? When he was appointed, how do you say, temporary president, at that time, there was many warlords all over China. And how do you say, in having a, how do you say, Republic of China, that meant warlords were illegal. And so all the warlords, especially middle and northern China, weren't in favor of it. And so he stepped down to let Yuan Shikai take over. But Yuan Shikai, when he took over, how do you say, he wanted to turn the Republic of China back to a monarchy, to be the king of or emperor of China. And so, as fate would have it, Yuan Shikai was overweight, bad health, so he died in office. And subsequently, Sun Yat-sen was, how do you say, asked to be president of China again.
Mhm.
Now, one tidbit of information. The grandson of Sun Yat-sen is my father, Sun Xun Ziping, Sun Ziping. Anyway, when my father married my mother up in Berkeley, UCB, their best man was the grandson of Yuan Shikai, and his name was John Yuan. And so here you have it, two grandfathers who were at each other's throats, but their grandchildren became fast friends, and John Yuan was my father's best man at my mom and dad's wedding. So this is, how do you say, my history of how, as time goes by, people, how do you say, aren't fighting. Now, John Yuan retired as a consul general for the Republic of China in Taiwan. So I'd like to meet his descendants because it's a story, you know, a storybook story, yeah, of the two families.
I do have a couple of questions. Number one, the first son of Sun Fo, right?
Yes,
Number one son.
yes.
That means a lot in Chinese history. So did you ever spend much time with your father after their divorce, from your mother-father divorce?
Not until as I became an adult with my own children. My father, he graduated from Cal Berkeley, or University of California, Berkeley, in Pali-sci. His younger brother, TK son, also was in Pali-sci, but both never got into politics. And I guess, well, at one time, how do you say, in the late 40s, before 1949, Chiang Kai-shek tried to assassinate my grandfather, Sun Fo. And my grandfather told me that he knew of 4 attempts on his life. That's why in 1949, when my grandfather left Shanghai, he went on 1 year's or longer than 1 year self-exile in Europe to avoid being assassinated. So my grandfather told my father and uncle, don't get into any Chinese politics or anything like that. So both my father and uncle went into regular business. They were businessmen.
Well, that's actually an interesting story too. And the funny thing about the assassination attempts is that it turns out, as you certainly know, Dr. Sun and Chiang Kai-shek were actually related. It turns out that they each married one of the Song sisters, and so they were brothers-in-law. Believe it, and yet Chiang Kai-shek attempted to assassinate the number one son. It's an amazing story.
Well, the main reason why is because at that time, after my Sun Yat-sen's death, 1925, there was a grab for power, and Sun Fo was a natural, how do you say, person to take over. But Chiang Kai-shek wanted to take over, so that's why the assassination attempts. Yeah.
Did you meet the Song sisters, Qing Ling
No.
and Mei Ling?
No. Well, I met Chiang Kai-shek's wife. Yes.
Mei Ling.
Yes. In fact,
In the United States?
No, okay. Even though Chiang Kai-shek tried to assassinate my grandfather, my grandfather's, after 1949 and maybe early 50s, my grandfather settled in Long Island, New York. Eventually, he moved out to Santa Monica and lived in Santa Monica, Anaheim, and Laguna Beach until 1964. At that time, the Republic of China Consul General in Los Angeles was my grandfather's good friend, Wei Doming. I don't know how to say Wei Doming.
Wei Daoming. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they were good friends, and my Wei Doming would actually see my grandfather at least once a week, if not every other week, and give reports on the news in Taiwan. And so in later part of 1964, Wei Doming told my grandfather that all is forgiven and Chiang Kai-shek is inviting my grandfather back to Taiwan.
Yes.
And so my grandfather asked Wei Doming to contact my grandfather's friends in Taiwan to see if this is true or not. And so it was true. So my grandfather went back to Taiwan for an exploratory visit of, I think, 3-4 days, maybe a week. And then eventually my grandfather returned to Taiwan in 1965. And when in 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek went to or moved his forces and everyone from mainland China to Taiwan, the home that he occupied was Emperor Hirohito's childhood home in a mountain resort called Yangmingshan. And so up in Yangmingshan, the Yi Bingguan, the #1 guest house, is where Chiang Kai-shek stayed. Eventually, he had his own mountain home built, and #1 guest house became the guest house for all foreign dignitaries. But when my grandfather returned to China to live, that #1 guest house was given to my grandfather. And so my grandfather stayed in Taiwan until he passed away. My grandmother and grandfather are buried in Yangmingshan. Yeah, so every year I try to go back and pay respects and stuff.
Well, this has actually been a wonderful interview, Leland, and it's actually even more than I had hoped for. This is just a lot of fun and interesting background, and I think this will meld very nicely in with that with the upcoming talk that we're having, sponsored by San Diego State Chinese Cultural Center and the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum next week. Do you have any speak?
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leland, for sharing your family history and for joining us in person today out of your very busy schedule. I know you'll be attending a wedding in just a few hours, but do you have time to say a few words to the audience here, as you know, in person?
Yes, I would like to say thank you for listening into the Zoom conference, my first conference, and I get to say what I know from being a descendant of Sun Yat-sen.
Leland, if I can make one little comment.
Yes.
I found that my hour interviewing you was perhaps more fun than I've had in a long time, and you were just a wonderful person. And I wanted to tell the audience today about the TV series where they can see you repeatedly, and also why they chose you as the appropriate extra for dozens of shows. Would you mention that little tidbit?
In working 37 years in Hollywood, I started out as an extra and tried to become an actor, which failed. And I was successful in being a stuntman. But for 11 years, I worked on the TV series MASH. And part of the reason why I was brought back to work the series every single episode was when a injured person had to be brought in from the how do you say, the mobile carrier or helicopter, two people would carry the body, and if the body was too heavy, it would be too heavy to lift onto the operating tables. And at that time, when I was younger, I was about 110 to 115 pounds. So myself and other small, light people were used to work in the surgery for the MASH episodes.
That's very cool. So folks out there, when you watch the MASH reruns, keep your eye open for somebody who looks like Leland Sun, but a little bit younger. Okay, thank you.
No gray hair.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Leland, and we hope you have a wonderful time at the wedding. And also, we look forward to seeing the webinar with the full interview with you and Dr. Chung and Dr. Stein. So thank you all so much for that terrific contribution. Thank you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Busaba Yip. Dr. Busaba Yip Douglas, PhD, was born in Bangkok, Chinatown in Thailand to a Chinese family from Inping, Guangdong, in South China. After receiving her BA in education from Chulalongkorn University, she spent 15 years in education and community development in rural Thailand before coming to North America. She earned an MA in Canadian Heritage and Development Studies from Trent University in Ontario, Canada, followed by a PhD in Integral Studies with a research focus on traditional knowledge from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. Dr. Yip has been the cultural director and docent at the Hing Museum Temple in Lahaina, Hawaii from 2000 to the August 2023 Lahaina fire. She is also a cultural director for the Hing Society, where she is the coordinator of the ongoing Hing Society research project that continues to provide new insights into the history of Chinese in Hawaii and the Hing Society. Welcome, Dr. Yip.
Hello, สวัสดีค่ะ ni hao, aloha. It's an honor to be with you all today, sharing history story of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, his family and connection to Lahaina Hing Society, Maui and Hawaii. Before it was destroyed in the August 2023 fire, Hing Society stood as a symbol of Chinese unity more than a century. We like to honor Chanwa and Chuntunyu, two of our Hing Society founders. Together with Lahaina Chinese, formed the Hing Society in the late 1800s and formally registered in 1906. In Cantonese, Wo means peace and harmony. Hing means prosperity. Hing Society provides community support for, at one time, hundreds of members in Lahaina town. From birth to death, all kinds of cultural events all year round. Besides, maintain social and political ties with their family and ancestral homeland. Next slide, please. When I first came to the Hing Museum, actually, I don't know much, 20 years ago, I started to do research. When I worked as a docent, the first research about Hawaiian Chinese and Hing Society. we found lots of exciting information from the research. The first group of Chinese that they found who came to Hawaii in 1788 from the Big Island. And 4 years after, the sandalwood traders start in Hawaii. So the Chinese call Hawaiian as Sandalwood Mountain, Tan Heng San, in Cantonese, Tan Sing San. So in 1852, that the biggest group of Chinese came to Hawaii, and a lot of them on Maui. Next, please. So their contribution is in set up the irrigation system or the tunnels from the mountain to the plantation field. We went up to the mountain on Maui. Some of the tunnel, the water is still running until today. The contribution also in the rice farming, taro, also the road to Hana by the Chinese engineer here on Maui. So today, Hawaiian like a rainbow, all kinds of Chinese, Filipino, Portuguese, all weaving together with the Hawaiian. Next, please. Next slide, please. So in 1940, a number of Chinese in Lahaina start to decline. So in the Working Society almost fell down from termites. The Lahaina Restoration Foundation came in 1983 and helped restore the building, turned into museum 1984. So I came to work in the year 2000. Thank you, Theo Morrison from the Lahaina Restoration Foundation. Together with Working Society, get the grant money. We have lots of fun things happening to all kinds of festivals, including honoring Dr. Sun Yat-sen. You can go online, even our physical building burned down, but our history story is still alive in the social media. Thank you. The next slide, please. This is the second research that's very exciting to share with you. We learned a lot about Sun Yat-sen and the connection to all the Chinese here in Hawaii, in particular on Maui. They really supporting Sun Yat-sen revolution. Even some, they closed their homes, went back to China. They sent their loved one. They know their children went, their husband went, they may not come home. So they still like support the revolution. So this document is very valuable. In the year, thank you, the Lahaina Restoration Foundation saved the life of these 2,000 pieces of record. So even the fire burned down the Hing Society building, but we still have all this record in a digital format. Please join us. We will continue to do our research and sharing our history and honoring Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Next slide, please. This is Lahaina town in early 1900. A lot of Chinese who work in the sugarcane plantation. When the contract ended, they moved out, opened their store and business, the beginning of Chinatown. Like the Gold Lip store here. It's very sad. In 1919, the first Lahaina fire burned all these Chinese store and never rebuilt. So a lot of problem with Chinatown about the fire burn, like even in Honolulu. Next slide, please. From our research, it's so exciting when we see different pieces of information come together. This picture in black and white is the first society hall of Working Society in late 1800. And we find out if Dr. Sun Yat-sen possible came to have a meeting at the second floor. You know, it's a sacred, this is a sacred room, ceremonial room and ancestor room. So this is the second floor or the society hall at one time. The second floor, there is an altar of Guan Gong or Guan Wu to honor him because he represents the spirit of brotherhood and remind all the Chinese the only way to survive is by helping each other. Next slide, please. So this is another exciting story we found from one of the 2,000 pieces record. This old document shows at one time Maui have 7 society hall. And this one, Wailuku Tong House, is the center of the Jigong Tong here on Maui. But the building already not there, falling down. Thank you, the Hing Society. Now they came to take care of this property. Please join us to bring back to life the history and honoring Dr. Sun Yat-sen. This is one of the center here on Maui. And the other side of this Hing Society Hall, Dr. Sun Yat-sen and Sun Mei must join as a member of this society hall up in Kula, Kia. Today, it was the second society hall that was rebuilt in the early 2000. And it's the only Chinese society hall left here on Maui. Next slide, please. So I'd like to share a little bit to honor Sun Mei. He was a silent hero behind Sun Yat-sen. We found information about him. He first arrived in 1871, and his sponsor Sun Yat-sen came. The whole family lived here. And these two plaques already burned in Lahaina fire. But we have a story to share with you because of the digital format. The big plaque is about the Hong Moon, the 5 months of the Shaolin Temple and the founding of the Hong Moon and Jigong Tong that supporting Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And the little black one on the right is to honor Guan Gong or Guan Wu during the Three Kingdoms. He represents a lot of Chinese in loyalty at the Peach Garden to inform that for the support Dr. Sun Yat-sen, we have to unite. Next slide, please. So the written document from the research, Sun Yat-sen came to Hawaii 1879 to 1910, make 6 trips together, okay, and formed the revolutionist organization. But the most exciting part of the research, when we met with the descendants of Sun Yat-sen, we like to thank you, all the descendants of Sun Yat-sen and Sun Mei. We found lots of records show that they were letters written by Sun Yat-sen sent to his family in Japan and his friend who supporting him, and mentioned he was here in Hawaii and Maui. If possible, more than 6 trips. Next slide, please. So this is a very significant historical site we like to honor here on Maui, Hawaii. It's the ranch of Sun Mei. Sun Mei came to Honolulu at the beginning. He was a very poor farmer. He has nothing. He saved all the money. At that time, not enough workers. He went back to China. He was a very successful farmer. So he brought a lot of Chinese came to Hawaii. Each workers, he received $100 at that time. He saved all the money, moved to Maui, opened a store in Kahului. He leased land from the government and become a rancher, very successful merchant and rancher, 3,900 acre ranch. He became one of the richest Chinese here in Hawaii. And this is his former residence of Sun Mei and Sun Yat-sen. And a lot of his fellow supporters, possible, this is a meeting place of the revolution. And thank you, Richard Chim and all the Chinese here who helping. We went to the land of Sun Mei. That the rock wall left until today. Only the rock wall left. It was a hunting field today. And Sun Mei also we find out he built the road from this map called McKenna Road from his land to the ocean. That means Sun Yat-sen can come anytime and hiding him, protect him at this ranch. So this is a very significant history. Not many people know to honor Sun Mei. And at the end, he lost everything. He filed bankruptcy, went back to China with no money, and continued his life to support his younger brother. Today, there's a Sun Yat-sen Park to honor the history of Dr. Sun Yat-sen and also Sun Mei. Thank you, the descendants of Dr. Sun Yat-sen and Sun Mei, who put together this special park here for us to remember all the history of Sun Yat-sen and Sun Mei here on Maui. Next slide, please. So this is a dream of Sun Yat-sen called Bo Ai, Universal Love, Tien Xia Wei Gong, the world belongs to all. And Sun Wen is the Chinese name of Sun Yat-sen. He combined the teaching of the Tao. The Tao is the way of life in ancient time, living in harmony with nature. After the first uprising failed, he left China, went to Japan, and came to Maui and traveled all over the world. He studied the Western idea of political movement combined to the teaching of the Tao into the three principles of the people, San, Min, Ju, Yi. Thank you. The next slide, please. So today you can see a lot of Sun Yat-sen statue here, and it's more than 200 of them all over the world. Thank you, the descendant of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who contribute to keep the history of Sun Yat-sen alive. And the bottom of each statue have a very educational information to share to the people to honor the teaching and the dream of Sun Yat-sen and keep it alive until today and passing for future generation. The next slide, please. So gathering, collecting, and documenting Chinese American history is significant. Thank you for all of you to set up this webinar for us to continue share our story. This is in 2019. We went to the Mocha Museum of Chinese in America to talk story about our history here on Maui in Hawaii. So this is significant for the future generation to continue our work in documenting our Chinese American and Chinese North American history. Next slide, please. It was very sad. I cry every time I saw this picture. The second fire in Lahaina burned down the Hing Society Hall, Temple, and Cook House. Together with the whole historic Lahaina town, but it did not destroy our hope for rebuilding. One day, we all will rise again like a phoenix out of the ashes. We will rise again with hope and strength of our family, community. Thank you, the Secretary of Hing Society, together with the Lahaina Restoration Foundation team, went to the site after the fire, took all these pictures, and the next slide, please, and saved all the artifacts that still carry the history of our ancestors here. And to honor them, I'd like to invite all of you to join the Hing Foundation website and go to the Lahaina, the next slide, please, to join us today by becoming a members and friend of the Hing Foundation and the Lahaina Restoration Foundation to rebuild Hing and Lahaina historic town. And I'd like to share a little personal story from as a survivor from the Lahaina fire. That day, I was told if I was at the Hing Museum, I will not be here to share the story with you. I will try to save the life of all the artifacts and Hing historical research that left at the museum. I was one of the last survivors, left Lahaina town. The president of Hing Society said to me, we survive because we still have some work to do. So thank you all for coming and invite us to share our story. All these artifacts still waiting to whisper tales of resilience and give hope for our community and show the world it is possible. We will rebuild. Thank you. Mahalo. Sisi. Aloha.
Mahalo, Dr. Yip, for that important presentation on Dr. Sun Yat-sen and the Lahaina Chinese community. And thank you so much for your work on preserving the history of Lahaina and the Chinese in Lahaina. Thank you so much. It is now my honor to introduce Lee Wai-du. Lee Wai-du believes peace is essential. A fourth-generation American from Hawaii, surfing with polio shaped his character. With a way of aloha and bo'ai, or universal love, He was educated at Columbia University and Harvard University with a degree in law. He was a Honolulu City Council member for 12 years and is a founding member of the Sun Yat-sen Hawaii Foundation, as well as the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies Foundation, of which he founded and served as its first president. Since 1984, he has been building American bridges to the People's Republic of China, as well as to Hong Kong and Taiwan since 1968, with over 65 trips in the past half century to connect with people and establish international relationships. These relationships include multiple education initiatives and U.S.-China sister cities. He was also active in resolving 2 China-U.S. disputes and was consulted on a respected presidential level. Though without Chinese language skills, Lee Wai-do is a trusted person in both China and the U.S. with accolades from both. At 78 years old, he is full-time in a power wheelchair, independent and happily still striving. He wishes all audience members a ho'o maikai maluhia honua for peace on earth and goodwill to all people.
Hele mai, Sun Yat-sen. Hele mai, Sun Yat Young American. This photograph is significant, symbolic of the dreams of Sun Yat-sen for a united China and a republic. He appealed to save China through aviation after Yuan Shikai had tried to restore himself as an emperor. And his appeal to save China through aviation rang a bell. Cortland, California, and Locke, California, up the West Coast, but especially to young Sun Yat in Hawaii. Next slide, please. This is the birth certificate of young Sun Yat as being born in Hawaii, and this certificate shows him at the age of 10, taking the name of Sun Yat-sen. It's the first name in Chinese characters as Sun Yat-sen has in reverse order. That's because his father, Young Hing, and Sun Yat-sen's grandfather, brother, I should say, were very close friends from the hometown of Zhongshan. They arrived nearly together and were business partners and friends throughout. So when Sun Yat-sen appealed to save China through aviation, this young boy joined the Tongmen Society and devoted his life to that cause. Next slide, please. He went to Buffalo, New York as his first overseas trip and obtained license 62 on a seaplane pilot at the Aero Club from the Curtis Aviation School, and license number 600 for land planes. This is in a setup, mind you, now where the licensing FAA is, in the millions of pilots that have been licensed in that international system. Next slide, please. But Sun Yat Young was so devoted that he split his family. That's his daughter, Florence Young, due now. And that's the only picture she ever has of her with her father, because her father left her behind to live in Hawaii while he went to fight in China. Next slide, please. He became Hawaii's first licensed pilot. This is the Honolulu Star Bulletin front page. And interestingly enough, the byline is, he states in the newspaper he was proudest of being an American. Next slide, please. He graduated under the training of Phil Rader at the Curtis Aviation School in Buffalo, New York. Phil Rader was the first known person to use aviation airplanes as a military bombing airplane and reconnaissance. He did that in the War of America with Mexico. Next slide, please. Sun Yat-sen was appointed the head of the Aviation Bureau by Sun Yat-sen. Next slide, please. And thus, he designed and built the first airplane manufactured in China. The writing on the bottom of that plane is by Sung Ching Ling, the wife of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And she credits him with having built and designed the Rosamond, a plane named after her. Next slide, please. Here's the lineup in 1923. Sun Yat-sen's the man in the middle with the cane. Sun Yat-sen is in a civilian white shirt and with a coat, with a tie. Why is he not in a uniform like everyone else there? It's because he's an American. Proudly so, he says. And that was a theme that followed him through his whole life, because he was like Lafayette to General George Washington, as Sun Yat-sen has often been called. Next slide, please. He hired many other Americans, Chinese Americans from California, as you can see in this name lineup here, that were like Sun Yat-sen, overseas Chinese that volunteered to fight and help Sun Yat-sen establish a new republic. But also he hired 3 Americans, Abbott, Coldwell, and Wild, to, by contract, paid them out of his own pocket and his father's money to train the Chinese pilots, as well as to build the Rosamond. Next slide. This is Sun Yat-sen's family in Maui. You've seen it before, but to the left, as we look at it, is Hawaii. He's half Hawaiian and half Chinese, and he's a brother of Sun Yat-sen and Sun Mei, adopted by Sun Mei. Next slide, please. In China, Sun Yat-sen and Sun Yat-sen inspired so much hope that they did at least 3 aviation stamps for airmail in China. Next slide, please. There were many Hawaii people that contributed enormously. Lu Ho Tong, Luke, and many, many others, as shown 5 years ago in Hawaii. Next slide, please. But when Sun Yat-sen died, it was like he lost his right arm, I had heard it said. So this is the writing by Dr. Sun Yat-sen on Sun Yat-sen's picture, with quotes from Leland Sun, who was then head of the government legislative body, and Zhu Pei-de, who was head of the Revolutionary Army of China at that time. Next slide. Which I just went over. Next slide. It was National Aviation Day was established. Next slide, please. In China. Here's his wife. The big banner above his wife is the well-known banner saying, "The world belongs to the people. The world belongs to everyone." I've heard stories of how Sun Yat-sen had to kneel in order to write that giant banner. And it's one of the most famous banners of Sun Yat-sen's calligraphy everywhere. Next slide, please. Sun Yat-sen called for the start of schools in his honor. And so there are today living schools, memorials to Sun Yat-sen in Zhongshan. And this first school had as its fundraiser Sung Ching-ling, the wife of Sun Yat-sen. Next slide, please. Here's a sister school agreement with the school in Honolulu, the Hahahione Elementary School. Next slide, please. There's a memorial in Wangwagong, Canton, with the airplane there. Next slide, please. The tombstone was written by Sun Yat-sen. Next slide, please. And he's celebrated in Taiwan quite significantly. This is a building of the Taiwan Air Force Academy named after Sun Yat-sen. Next slide, please. There's his hometown on the village gate, the upper left, saying hometown of Yang Shen-yi. And the airplane above his Wangwagong memorial and the tombstone. Next slide, please. In Taiwan, at the Wangwagong Memorial in Taipei is his granddaughters from Hawaii visiting the memorial in Taipei with his name on the Wangwagong. Next slide, please. Here's my son Adam and myself in the Zhongshan Jimaling Park, which has only one tomb, one graveyard, and that is this graveyard for Yang Shen-yi, Sun Yat-sen, Hawaii, American aviator. Why Jimaling Park? Because that's the same name of Jimaling Mountain, Purple Mountain in Nanjing, where Sun Yat-sen is buried. So this is his counterpart in South Guangdong Province, Zhongshan. Next slide, please. And that was celebrated and is still today every year celebrated as the National Aviation Day in China. Next slide, please. Last year was the 100th anniversary of his death. And so the proclamation from Honolulu's Mayor Blangiardi kindly recognized that, and it was given and promoted in Zhongshan at that tombstone gravesite. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Here's a photograph of the Sun family with myself on the far right in China. The Leland Sun's in there, Victor Sun is in there, and many Sun families. Next slide, please. That's me in the Great Hall of the People on the 100th anniversary of the final 11th effort of a revolution. The prior 10 revolutions failed. Next slide, please. Bo'ai, universal love, is a very famous slogan by Sun Yat-sen to young Kwang Tat of Hawaii. This Bo'ai statement means love and fraternity. It's probably the closest word, universal love, to our Hawaii's aloha, which Sun Yat-sen at one time identified himself with the alias Mr. Aloha from Hawaii. So I want to close with that and say that this bo'ai is the only word on the first entrance gate in Nanjing's tomb memorial for Sun Yat-sen as you begin the steps going up to his gravesite. Thank you all very much, and hui ho. Hope to see you all again. Call on me for anything, anytime. Aloha.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Levi. We really appreciate that terrific presentation about Dr. Sun and Sun Yat-sen and the history of Chinese aviation. Thank you so much. I'm now delighted to introduce Montgomery Han as our next speaker. Montgomery Han is an independent producer and a longtime production and historical military subject matter specialist. Montgomery consults on many Hollywood films and television productions. His work can be seen in the Academy Award-nominated film Ford vs. Ferrari. His Emmy-nominated PBS film, We Served with Pride, Chinese American Experience in World War II, will be relaunched as a new remastered version for its 20th anniversary in 2021. As a young boy, hearing stories of an uncle who was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne during the invasion of Normandy kickstarted his deep passion for researching and collecting artifacts and data on Chinese Americans in World War II. Today, his collection is the largest privately held grouping of its kind. His wife is a long-serving United States naval officer who was deployed in northern Afghanistan. We look forward to your presentation. Thanks, Montgomery.
Aloha, everyone. It's great to be here. Such an honor to be part of this esteemed panel. So awesome. Thank you, Dr. Chang and Dr. Ben. We wanted to start off a little bit about the fact that really Dr. Sun should be considered a paper son, just like so many other Chinese that came to California, the East Coast, etc. He was an early paper son as seen by his documents. Next, please. As we see here, we know that the document was forged, but obviously he still had this document to come into Hawaii, the United States. Next slide, please. And it was even an official of the immigration department even had their affidavit to say, yes, this is genuine. So definitely Dr. Sun should be considered one of the early paper sons of America. Next slide, please. Now, everyone knows this famous picture. This is the 5 bandits, 5 desperados. I'm going to talk about today a Chinese American from Hawaii, born in Kona in 1910, a captivating, polarizing individual. His grandfather is on the very left side, seated next to Dr. Sun. That is Yeung Ho Ling, and that is his grandfather. But I also have a very special announcement to make from dear friend actress Nancy Kwan. And there's a gentleman standing in the back as the 5th individual. That is her grand uncle. And that was just shared to me 2 days ago. Next slide, please. Nancy Kwan, everyone knows, is one of our leading actresses, obviously star of our Hollywood's past. She is no introduction. She may be watching today, but I just wanted to bring out that she shared with me that her grand uncle is one of the 5 bandits, and I was completely shocked, right? And that's his name is Guan Ging Leung. And so she has a long history with her father's history of the Kwans in Hong Kong and China. But we're going to save this for another story. Next slide, please. Here is Jack's grandfather, Leung Ho Ling. Next slide, please. And here, this photo is one of the later photos. Seated in the center is Dr. Sun with the black arrow. Seated to his right, on the left, is the grandfather and Jack's father directly behind him. Next slide, please. Jack's story really starts by the time he graduates Columbia University. He is part of the Roosevelt expedition to China in the 1920s. And this book, Chasing the Panda, which was a story that was told to me by his daughter, and thank you, Chai-Ling. Chai-Ling Young was the person that gave me the information on her father. And it is a very, very captivating story, which not very many people know. Her father, her mother, and her uncle, Jack's brother, were all part of this early expedition to obviously locate the first panda and to bring that panda to Chicago, to America. Next slide, please. And here they are in the expedition of 1933 to 34. Jack is on the right. Young wife Adelaide is in center, and Quentin is on the left, the tall figure. Next slide, please. Here he is, obviously deep in the Chinese territories. They were also afraid of bandits, which is why they were armed. He even taught his wife how to shoot. This is in 1935. Next slide, please. And this picture is really cool. I mean, they look like a band of banditos, right? The three banditos, right? But they're Chinese American. Look at Adelaide. She's carrying a pistol. She had to learn to shoot because there were bandits and there were wild animals, including bears. Next slide, please. This is the end of the story, where it is a later expedition in which Quentin, the younger brother to Jack, goes on the expedition to help Ruth Harkness bring back the first panda. And that basically concludes, quote, the panda story in China with the Youngs. Next slide, please. So now we move forward. Here is Jack in U.S. Army uniform. This is later in the war from 1944 to 45. Jack was very interesting, and the fact that he actually served in the Chinese military first and then crossed over to the U.S. Army because of his background. Understand that Jack was an adventurer. He was a mountaineer, a linguist, and a soldier. Jack spoke 5 languages. He spoke several Chinese dialects, Korean and Japanese fluently. Next slide, please. Now, in this very rare publication by J.L. Huang, and that's J.L. Huang on top, and in all these photographs, they're very, very important because he is the person that has an eyewitness account to Jack Young's work in China. In 1937, many of you know that the Chinese art treasures of the Palace Museum was in jeopardy. The Japanese were coming in quick and furious, and they were about to capture Nanjing. Now, it was the work of J.L. Huang, the museum director, Ma Heng, as well as the board of the museum, as well as the help of the British, that provided funding to be able to get those art treasures out quickly. They had around 2 to 3 weeks at the most, and there was somewhere about 3,000 cases that needed to be moved. The person that was in charge of this operation on the ground was Jack Young. And this is a point that is not very known by many people. The story is very, very rare. J.L. Huang appointed Jack to be the lead person to coordinate and get those art treasures to safety. And that's what he did. In the memoirs, Jack had said, the world, China, Taiwan, owes Jack Young a debt of gratitude for saving all these Chinese art treasures for posterity. Next slide, please. As you see, that's a quote. We talk about J.L. Huang, we talk about Jack's involvement, and obviously this is the first time that we know that Jack Young for sure was the guy, the boots on the ground, that coordinated this incredible, incredible operation to save all these art treasures and placed them all over China in the deep territories and villages, caves, etc., to save them for posterity. Next slide, please. Jack was awarded also 2 Medal of Freedoms, one during World War II and one after, which is a very highly unusual situation. And it was also noted by many individuals that have written about Jack in private memoirs or even official documents that he was one of the guys that he was in every picture in every important meeting, but you never knew his name. He was in the important situations with General Marshall, Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong at the end of the war, in all those negotiations, and he was the top guy there. He was not just an interpreter, but he was involved in those negotiations. Next slide, please. And here he is towards the end of the war with one of his Chinese counterparts. Next slide, please. And it was, again, we want to point out the fact that he was involved in these high level meetings. General Marshall, the United States staff, obviously between Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong, and of course, with Chiang Kai-shek. And at the end of all this, of course, he did go to Taiwan and support many operations out of the nationalist government and the nationalist military as a U.S. Army officer. Next slide, please. And here he is. This is during the Korean War, 1951-52, meeting Chiang Kai-shek. And it was at this time when Jack was transferred to the 2nd Infantry Division, and he headed a very, very special clandestine group. Next slide, please. Here he is training what we call silent kills. And he was involved with a U.S. Army group, special operations, in a very, very unique situation where they actually captured North Korean soldiers and turned them into to fight for the United States forces and United Nations forces and South Korean, and it was a turncoat operation they call. Next slide, please. And here is one of the very rare pictures of Jack right in the middle, heading this particular training group, which was called the Ivanhoe Security Forces. And again, turncoat operation, highly clandestine, early special forces operations in Korea. Next slide, please. And here he is. In his later years, he made full bird colonel. He retired in 1970, but he also served in the Vietnam War. But the files and the information to Jack Young's work is still classified for Vietnam. So we do not have those papers, we do not have that information, but we were told by a special operations officer he did a lot more than we can ever imagine. Next slide, please. This is a special little segment that we wanted to add. This came from Dr. Ben. And since the Olympics are coming, we thought we'd talk about the first Asian Americans and the first Chinese American, and all these men are from Hawaii. Here is Rich Tom, champion weightlifter, who medaled in the 1948 Olympics as the first Chinese and Chinese American to ever achieve that level and to be recognized as an Olympian, but he medaled as part of the U.S. weightlifting team. Next slide, please. And here is a really cool picture. The tall gentleman basically with the group is, you guys might have seen the James Bond movie, Goldfinger. That's Harold Sakata as Oddjob. Harold was also a champion weightlifter. And the really cool thing about these athletes was there was never a group of Asian American athletes that competed on a national level and won. These men from Hawaii, these athletes, Asian Americans, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, were the first to be on that level, to be recognized by American athletics in the United States. Next slide, please. And here is Rich Tom, Harold Sakata in their younger days. Pretty manly. These guys obviously made a lot of history. They were local champions, they were state champions, and then they made it onto the Olympic stage. Next slide, please. And here, this is a group where we see them in the 1952 era, because Dr. Yu in the center is one of the individuals from Hawaii who is very well known in the athletics for weightlifting. Again, we have Rich Tom, You know, we have the regular group of local guys that made it onto that national stage and also participated, some men also participated in the 1952 Helsinki Olympics. Next slide, please. And again, here's Rich Tom winning another regional state title. And again, before his retirement, he also coached. And again, Rich Tom was a World War II veteran, and he was born in China, Canton, and then immigrated to Hawaii later in life, and obviously stayed in Hawaii for all of his life. Next slide, please. And here are the men in their later years, and we wanted to just show this bonding spirit of these Asian American brothers, the Japanese Americans, Chinese, Korean. They all came together to do one sport that they love, which was weightlifting, and they all became champions one way or the other. Some of them made it on to obviously to an international stage with the Olympics, but the fact that they were the first Asian American athletes to reach this level, all from Hawaii, is really remarkable. And I want to thank Brian Nia of Los Angeles for sharing this really rare information with us that we will cover in a later show. But again, thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Montgomery, for that terrific presentation on Jack Young and the Chinese veterans and Olympians. It's such a terrific, very fascinating and important history. I have learned so much from all of the presenters in this webinar. I just want to say mahalo and duoxie again. Our presenters are incredibly accomplished and dedicated. We thank them so much for sharing their mo'olelo and their leisure and all of their wonderful dedication and very accomplished knowledge and learning. Thanks to Professor Douglas Chong, Leland Sun, Dr. Busabai Yip Douglas, Lee Wai Du, and Montgomery Han. We're just so grateful to all of you today. We also want to share our thanks to the generous sponsors and organizers of this panel, including San Diego State University and the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, Dr. Lily Chung, Executive Director Jacinta Wang, Programs Coordinator Elizabeth Cheney, and researcher Mr. Mu-Ting Huang, San Diego State University Chinese Cultural Center Curator Dr. Yudan Wang, and Dr. Ben Xu in particular of the Chinese North American History Network, Dr. Gay Yun, Dr. Robert Stein, and Ms. Yen Chun. And I just want to thank all of you for individually and collectively all of your expertise and dedication in preserving and celebrating the history of the Chinese in Hawaii and the United States. It's truly incredibly important work that you're all doing. And now we get to open for questions from our audience. You can ask questions by typing them into the chat, or you can raise your hand. We have a wonderfully large audience, so we might not get to all the questions, but we will be very glad to hear from as many of our audience members as we possibly can. So thank you very much again. And I think, yeah, we can get started with questions. We had a lot of remarks about how fascinating and proud we are to be part of this community. We had one question for Dr. Leland Sun in particular, Mr. Leland Sun, about Dr. Sun Yat-sen's core tenets, and could any of his goals been achieved without revolution? Leland, do you want to speak to, take a moment to speak to Dr. Sun Yat-sen's core tenets? I think Leland is still here.
I don't believe my great-grandfather could have succeeded without a overthrow of the Manchu dynasty.
Yeah, he certainly was very dedicated to revolution. He persevered despite numerous obstacles. So yeah, he was incredibly committed. Great, thank you so much. We also have a hand raised by Benson Hong. Benson, do you want to share your question?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I just have a question because I'm from Canada, actually. I'm from Victoria, Canada, BC. So it's kind of linked to the the Dr. Sun Yat-sen's visit. So yeah, because when I look into a lot of KMT's Canada's archive and research, they mentioned multiple times that Dr. Sun visited Canada in 1910, but there's other resource and source saying they at this in 1910, Dr. Sun is actually in Honolulu. So I'm just kind of this kind of questions kind of keep bothering me for a little bit, and it's kind of hard when we're trying to talk about it in presentation or trying to engage or outreach to a younger Chinese Canadian in Vancouver or Victoria, talk about Dr. Sun's visit. So it just kind of, maybe this might be a easy question for you guys, since in Honolulu, they probably have more evidence and resource, but for us in Canada, or at least Western Canada, it was the information was very limited. I'm just kind of wondering, do you guys have any like resource or like archive that can share with us, saying like kind of show where Dr. Sun's visit at that time? Thank you.
Yes, years ago, when I first went to Taiwan, because my grandfather was there in the 1970s, there was Sun Yat-sen publications about his life through pictures and English and Chinese. And it had a world map that documented 8 trips around the world that Dr. Sun Yat-sen took. And to my thinking, every trip that my great-grandfather took, he had to stop in Hawaii and then go on to the US and then Europe.
Great, well, thank you. We actually have a question about Dr. Sun's travels, and in particular going from Hawaii to the continental US. There's that famous photo where he's holding a kind of clipboard. Anyone want to offer some contextual information or insight about that voyage, that photo?
This photo was taken in that 1904 incident when we talked about Sun Yat-sen being detained at immigration station in San Francisco because of the Bawangdong spies who had sent word on to the immigration station in San Francisco to not admit Sun Yat-sen because he was carrying a fake birth certificate. And so that is that famous photo that was taken in that period. But as we talked about, we're very thankful that Dr. Sun did become a triad or Hong Mun member, and it was the triad people in San Francisco who bailed him out and who got an appeal for him, and he was happily released.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, Leland.
May I ask or give some information to Mr. Ham? During my movie careers, I met a Navy person, retired person who, as we got to talking about the prior to World War II in China, he told me that he spent 5 years of his Navy career in the Arizona caves, guarding what is now most of the artifacts in the National Museum in Taipei. So what basically what he told me is most everything in the Taipei National Museum was housed in the Arizona caves that he had to guard for 5 years.
Thank you, Leland, for that. That's pretty remarkable. I think it's really important for people to understand that the national art treasures from the Palace Museum, this is a big deal, right? because if the Japanese, incoming Japanese would have taken over Nanjing at that time, and everything would have fallen into the Japanese hands, well, you guys would understand, right? We would have lost so many artifacts, right? But there was also a book written recently by a British gentleman named Adam Brooke, and it's called Fragile Cargo. And I have a problem with his research because he's basically giving all of the credit to the British to save those art treasures, and that is absolutely, not true. And if it wasn't for this rare book written by J.L. Huang, and now J.L. Huang was a very interesting individual because he started working for the nationalist government in the 1920s and got to know obviously Chiang Kai-shek really, really well, and Chiang Kai-shek entrusted him with so many things. So by the 1930s, he was heading a group for China called the War Area Services Commission, and they were principally responsible for taking care of many aspects for foreign governments, Americans, British, etc. Right, and so that is where J.L. Huang heard about this young Chinese American guy and obviously interviewed him and said, God, this guy is talented. This guy is something. He speaks 5 languages, et cetera, et cetera. And he was pulled aside and said, we're going to give this job to you, and you're going to be the guy to coordinate getting this stuff out. We don't care how you do it, just do it, right? So this is a real big story, and we hope that we can kind of come back upon this a little bit later. And of course, Jack's grandfather, is one of the 5 bandits, right? Leung Ho Ling. And so that's also another scenario that a lot of people didn't know. And so he has a direct tie-in with his grandfather and father to Dr. Sun. So hopefully we can talk about this a little bit more later.
Great. Thank you so much, Montgomery. I think we had a couple of questions. People were interested if there was any information on, Sun Yat-sen's ethnic background and his language abilities. Did he speak additional dialects, and about his kind of Hakka and Punti backgrounds? Anyone want to speak to some of that information about Dr. Sun Yat-sen?
Please, Doug. Doug, tell everybody what you know.
Dr. Chong?
Am I connected?
Here you are. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, basically, as I had said, Sun Yat-sen was Punti. He doesn't look pure Chinese as the stereotypic Chinese looks, but he was totally Chinese. He was Punti. He does not have any Hakka blood. It has been proven over and over again. He spoke the Zhongshan dialect or the Hing Yut-wa, but his ancestral tongue, going back before his great-great-grandfather, was Namlong, which essentially was Fukienese. We still speak this Namlong dialect in this area of Sitaidu, approximately 8 square miles, in which all of these villages still speak it. And when Sun Yat-sen had overthrown the Manchus and set up the republic, during the first Qingming, or a period of memorials for the ancestors, Sun Yat-sen and his family went back to Choputao in the Namlong region to give thanks to the ancestors. And this very famous picture was taken and is in the Choputao Sen or Sin ancestral grounds there. Now, when we talked about that there were all these different languages, it is well known that all of us who come from Zhongshan, we all speak at least 3 dialects. We have to, because in order to survive, we speak our own. Let's say we speak Namlong at home, but we speak what we call Dagatiem. Dagatiem in Namlong means the prevailing Pakwa language of the Zhongshan people. So they speak Zhongshan. And then many of them became merchants and went to Hong Kong or Guangzhou and learned the standard 9-tone dialect. Now, it's very interesting because Chinese of that day were very flexible. And remember, Sun Yat-sen himself studied with a lot of these Hakka youngsters, and therefore he could speak it to a good degree, I believe. Because remember, Choi Hang is at the very edge of the mountain area. Right behind him were all the Hakka villages. And in fact, many of the Hakka students, when they went on to school, went to the Choi Hang village school in later years. So because Sun Yat-sen had to live and did live with a lot of his good friends who were Hakka, I'm quite sure he spoke it quite easily. Remember, Chinese are very adept at picking up other dialects. He also had to learn some Siap because there were a lot of wealthy Siap merchants in Maui. And as far as knowing Namlong, there was always this story told by my maternal grandmother, who told me that when Sun Yat-sen was dying, he reverted back to the Namlong dialect. And to me, it was kind of distant because knowing Choi Hang is not Namlong, it's right outside of the Namlong area. I asked her, and she said he was native to Namlong people. So I guess, whether that was true or not, I'm not sure. But it's very, very evident that Sun Yat-sen was very multi-dialectal, multilingual. He could switch from one dialect to a next, like many educated Chinese speak 3 to 4 dialects with ease.
Thank you so much, Douglas. And I just want to again share my appreciation for all the knowledge, just incredible expertise in this panel and also in our audience today. And just a couple of quick comments and suggestions that were brought forward. First of all, we're very grateful to have Wing-Tek Lum, who's a noted poet, a published poet here in Honolulu. And he's recommending a book which was written by another attendee to today's panel, Patrick Anderson, who has a book on Sun Yat-sen, Robert Wilcox, and their failed revolutions, which came out with Routledge Press in 2021. Also want to thank Yan Shun of the Hawaii Sun Yat-sen Hawaii Foundation. She pointed out a really terrific book from 1999 about Sun Yat-sen and Hawaii activities and supporters, which is available on the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Hawaii Foundation website in both English and Chinese. And finally, I want to thank Dr. Ronald Williams, who is the archivist at the Hawaii State Archives, who is available to welcome people to actually do research at the Hawaii State Archives on the history of the Chinese in Hawaii. So just a few notes there by way of thanks to all the participants and the panelists. Again, I learned an incredible amount today. Thanks Montgomery again for talking about Dr. Sun's paper sun status. That's a really important concept and term to keep in mind. Thank you again to all of our organizers and Dr. Lily Chung, Dr. Ben Shu, and all the panelists. Mahalo, and hope to see you all again doing research on this wonderful topic.